Welcome to Central. This video has been recorded so that you can watch it ahead of a group discussion later on. Central Online is new for me, it's new for you, it will be new for your group leaders, and we're really going to learn by doing this thing together. Only a couple of weeks ago, we were all together in the St. Lawrence building. Can you believe that was only a couple of weeks ago? So much has happened since then. If you can remember that session that we had together, I asked you to write some questions for me about heaven, hell, and eternity. And you guys wrote me some brilliant questions on this subject. In total, there were 48 questions. And so we've decided to break this up into more than one session. Some of your questions I will attempt to answer directly. Other questions I will answer indirectly in the material that we'll cover in these videos and our questions and discussions. And some of your questions I probably just won't be able to answer because I haven't got a clue how to answer them. So if you asked me, is there going to be food in heaven? I've got an answer for you. If you asked me, what happens to people who don't have a chance to hear about Christianity? I will cover this, maybe not directly, but I will cover it. And if you asked me, are ghosts real? Well, you're going to be disappointed because I'm not going to cover that in any of my sessions. So first up, I want to start in the beginning. In order to understand, for me, heaven, hell, and eternity, we have to understand where everything begins. The Bible says that in the beginning, there was God, and that God created. God made things. The Genesis account tells us that God was making things, and that was really the only idea on his mind. In the very beginning, he set out by creating and making things that were good. God made everything, and he said it was good. And he should know because God himself is good. It's important to remember that because I think God's character is so important to understanding heaven and hell and eternity, and maybe getting rid of some of our misunderstandings about this subject. And so the Bible tells us that God created in the beginning and he said that it was good. I don't really want to get into the debate of the how of creation. Maybe in your group session, that's exactly what you'll do. But whatever you think about how things were created, the Bible is unquestionable in who is responsible for creation. It says that God created. After the Bible tells us that God was pleased with his creation, we're then told that people got ahead of themselves and they took what they couldn't have, and that was the forbidden fruit. And as a result, what God had made good became tainted. People brought death, decay, suffering and pain, brokenness, loneliness, and separation from God into God's good creation. This is my belief. I believe all of that stuff. And I think you need to know that because it informs my understanding of heaven, hell, and eternity. And what heaven certainly is like and how it works, and also what hell is like and how that works. So most of your questions were about what heaven is like. So, is heaven real? Will people fly in heaven? Are there food? Are there animals? Will we look different? Will we look the same? Is it going to be boring? Are there going to be any shops? Can we do any shopping? Will we be able to talk to one another? Is there tea and coffee in heaven? And what about our pets? Are they going to be in heaven? Some of these were your brilliant, brilliant questions. Of course, I don't know exactly what heaven is like because I have not been there. And I rather suspect if I had been to heaven, that if I came back now to explain to you what it was like, I probably just wouldn't have words to explain it. And of course, when we look at the Bible, it uses picture language to talk a lot about heaven. So we might talk about how it's raining outside, and we might say that it's raining like cats and dogs. It uses this kind of picture language. So certainly we have to be aware that when heaven is spoken about in the Bible, it does the same kind of thing. This is because I think ultimately we can't really understand every aspect of what heaven is like because it's just not in our vocabulary. But let's have a go and see what we can learn. I think the problem for us all when we come to this subject of heaven is that we have mixed up references, some from art, some from music, and many from myth. We've all seen paintings probably or pictures of what heaven is supposed to be like. Most of them are very otherworldly. And popular myths of heaven have it as a fanciful place where spirits sit on clouds playing harps and they float around in this kind of nebulous space. From your questions about heaven and popular ideas, I think we could have the understanding that heaven is not earthly. We have this idea of you go to heaven when you die. It's this idea that you're going to a better place. It's not like earth. Secondly, we think that heaven is not physical. This is why we wonder if we can eat, if we can fly, whether there will be shops, etc. And then I think that there's often this idea that heaven is not like our experience now. That heaven is going to be boring because all we're really going to do is sit on clouds, eat Muller Lite and play harps. So the idea of what's going to come now is really to explain some of those things in that context. That is heaven earthly or is it not earthly? Is heaven physical or is it not physical? Is heaven like our experience or unlike our experience? What I want you to know, first of all, is this idea of going to another place when you die that is not like earth. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible doesn't really talk about going to heaven when you die. In many ways, it's the opposite. The pictures we have of heaven, and most of which come from the book of Revelation, speak about all the things that we know being made new again. This is why where we come from, the beginning, is really important. It's about being made new. It's why our understanding of creation is so key to understanding what heaven is like, because God is going to make things new again. This is what we might read if we read Revelation. It says this: I saw heaven and new earth created. Gone was the first heaven, gone was the first earth, gone was the sea. I saw holy Jerusalem, newly created, descending resplendent out of heaven, as ready as for God, as a bride for her husband. This is the idea of things being made new, of things being recreated. I think this is really important, and I will keep coming back to this idea. The Bible goes on to say that in heaven there'll be no more pain, no more tears, and there will be peace. The Old Testament and the New Testament speak about houses in heaven, they speak about vineyards, and they speak about beautiful gardens. Bear in mind, when the Bible was written over 2,000 years ago, this idea of vineyards and gardens, they would be a very normal thing, perhaps for us like shops and houses, even cinemas. So the pictures that we are given in the Bible of heaven are of things that we would understand, that people then would understand, being made new. That's to say, too, that things being remade speaks about our experience now. Our experience is things on this earth are not as we'd expect them to be. Just look around us about what's happening right now. This idea of heaven, where there'd be no more pain, no more suffering, points to how our experience on earth here right now is broken, and that things in this newly created earth are going to be so much better. So one of the questions that was asked is heaven real? Let me ask you, is earth real? The picture the Bible gives here is of a real thing. John 14 talks about building houses for people. We know he's got the skills. He was a wicked carpenter in his day. Maybe not wicked. He was a great carpenter in his day. The Bible refers to heaven as being physical, real images pointing back to the original creation. Of beautiful gardens, of abundant fruit and trees and animals, Like I said, these are ideas of things that people would have known at the time. So if the Bible was written now, why would it not be things that we understand? And as I said, there will be animals. I think this means that we get to live in a world much more like the one that God intended and that we see in the original story of creation. We're not spirits on clouds, but this is a real, tangible, material heaven with God. And yet, without sin, without the things that make this earth, this world that we understand, not great. Sin is really that thing that separates us from God. I believe, therefore, if we're in a place that's sinless, we'll be able to walk with God, talk with Him, and I'm sure that we'll be able to communicate and talk with one another. To take this idea a little bit further, if Eden gives us something of a picture of what heaven is like, I understand it like this. It's like the earth that we know now, but without the bad bits. Just because this idea of Eden seems a bit basic, just really a garden with nothing else in it but plants and a couple of people, doesn't mean that heaven is going to be basic. It just gives us this idea of beautiful abundance and God with people. God created earth and He created people to be creative in it. This means that we'll see the best of humans in heaven, a reflection of God Himself. This means I think there'll be music, there'll be design, there'll be art, there'll be creativity, there'll be sport, there'll be culture, and there will be connection. These are all things that God Himself has created and put in us. Therefore, why would they not be in heaven? Will we recognise other people in heaven? I don't see why not. Does it mean that we'll see our pets in heaven? Personally, I think not. This is much more about what happens next, about judgment, and we'll come to that in another session. For me, the reason that we're unlikely to see our pets in heaven is because I think, will our pets be saved? I think that's a completely different question. It's much more about judgment. But in truth, I think not. So I'd encourage you to enjoy your pets now. And I think there will also be wonderful, incredible animals in heaven. So you'll get a new pet then. But let's not get bogged down in that one. I think what I'm trying to say is heaven won't be boring. If we think that the culture of heaven is set by God Himself and He is creative, then it won't be dull, it will be creative. But also God is love, which means that it won't be a place of dissatisfaction, which is, I think, the root of boredom, that we're dissatisfied. So heaven, therefore, will be creative and it will be loving, it won't be boring. I even think there will be a lot more for us to do than just singing. Will we have physical bodies? I think if the whole of earth is to be recreated, then we too are to be recreated. I'll talk more about that in another session too. But I believe we will have bodies. The Bible says that our bodies will be free from disease, free from pain, and free from death in heaven. We will have bodies, but better ones. This is really the end of my video, and there'll be some discussion questions that we will give to you when we come to have our discussion session. I'm really pleased that you've watched this video, that you're thinking a bit more about heaven. We'll put some Bible references with those questions so you can really think about what the Bible says. Thank you for watching.